Today I'd like to talk to you about the Groveland Four. The Groveland Four were recently exonerated. Basically what happened is they were falsely accused of the rape of a white woman. Her name was Norma Paget. She was 17 at the time, and also accused of assaulting her husband. And their accusation goes back to July 16th, 1949. Very interesting case. The administrative judge, Heidi Davis, dismissed the indictment of Ernest Thomas and Samuel Shepard, who were unfortunately fatally shot by law enforcement. And she set aside the convictions and sentences of Charles Greenlee and Walter Irvin. They ranged in age at the time from 16 to 26. They were accused of raping a woman in Central Florida, in the town of Groveland in 1949. Greenlee, Shepard, and Irvin were arrested and were beaten to coerce confessions. But Irvin, even though he was beaten, refused to confess. Bill Gladson, the county prosecutor and the local state attorney, when asked about this, just said, well, we followed the evidence. The hearing took place in the same courtroom as the original trial. So it was kind of a fascinating outcome in the sense that they were many years later. You're talking about 72 years later in the exact same courtroom, and in the one courtroom they were found guilty. In the other courtroom, they were exonerated of the crime. Amazing story in terms of the symmetry of what happened there. And maybe, of course, this will lead to the examination of other cases. Some of these cases, as you look at them, you say, well, how did this happen? This kind of miscarriage of justice. And a lot of it was due, of course, to the nature of the times and trying to get convictions against certain people that there was a bias against them, and the evidence wasn't looked at fairly and honestly. Thomas fled and was killed by a posse of 1,000 white men who pursued him and shot him over 400 times while he was asleep under a tree shortly after the rape accusations. So certainly an unfortunate outcome for a man who was later on proven, many years later, of course, to be innocent. But again, the emotions of the time, 1,000 men in a posse trying to find this fellow, and they found him, and well, let's just shoot him, and again, the emotions running wild, and that's again part of what we look at here is the factual case versus the emotions. White woman, black man, the whole idea that he had to be guilty. We see this in The Birth of the Nation, that it was stoking that fear. That famous film by D.W. Griffiths was the idea that the black men were after the white woman, and again, this stokes fears, racial stereotypes, and people let their emotions, of course, run wild. Shepard's house was burned to the ground by a mob. The coroner's jury ruled that Thomas had been lawfully killed and ruled his death a justifiable homicide. So even though he was shot 400 times and all these people around, they said it was justifiable. Again, how you would rule such a homicide would be justifiable, it's hard for us to comprehend, but again, a reflection, unfortunately, of the times. Only the presence of the National Guard halted the destruction caused by the rioters. Cockcroft, the leader of the riot, told a reporter, "The next time we'll clean out every Negro section in South Lake County." So again, that was part of the emotion of the time, part of the stereotyping, the prejudice, the discrimination of the time, that, we're just going to clean them all out. We don't want them around us. we don't want anything to do with them. The local sheriff, Willis McCall, fatally shot Shepard and wounded Irvin in 1951 as he drove them to a second trial. So he was driving them to a second trial. The first trial was ruled invalid. He's driving them to the second trial, and unfortunately, Shepard got shot, and Irvin was wounded but survived. An FBI investigation determined that Shepard and Greenlee were beaten by the deputies, James Yates and Leroy Campbell, until they confessed. So a simple way to get the confession out of them was obviously to beat them. The agents documented the physical abuses with photographs. The Justice Department urged the U.S. Attorney in Tampa to file charges, but U.S. Attorney Anthony Herbert Phillips was reluctant and failed to return any indictments. So unfortunately, even though there was photographic evidence that these men were beaten, coerced into a confession, the U.S. Attorney at the time did nothing about it. There were questions about whether Paget was actually raped. Dr. Jeffrey Bineveld, the physician who examined her, was not allowed to be called as a witness. No spermatozoa was present in the vagina. So the thought was this woman claimed to be raped, and there was no evidence that she was raped. And at the trial, the doctor's testimony was not adduced, was not allowed in for whatever reason. It was ruled out by the judge. They were convicted, these men, by an all-white jury. The Supreme Court overturned the original convictions, saying no evidence had been presented. So, I mean, you can't convict people without any evidence, and the Supreme Court overturned it. The sheriff claimed that then the men he was transporting, that they tried to escape, but Irvin said McCall and his deputy shot them in cold blood. So, and again, it was a situation where the Supreme Court had overturned it. There was going to be a second trial. They thought these men maybe would get off, so let's shoot them instead, as we shot the other fellow. On Christmas night in 1951, a bomb went off below the home of Harry Moore, who is the executive director of the Florida NAACP, and who organized a campaign against the wrongful conviction of the 3 black men. Moore died that night, and his wife died 9 days later. The bombers were never caught. So again, he was in a situation where he tried to get justice for these men, and what happened is he was unfortunately killed. Gilbert King's book in 2012, The Devil in the Grove, Thurgood Marshall, the Groveland Boys, and the Dawn of a New America, about the case, won the Pulitzer Prize, and he attended the hearing in which they were exonerated, along with Thurgood Marshall Jr., the son of the lawyer in the original case. Thurgood Marshall later on became the Supreme Court Justice. Thurgood Marshall Sr., then with the NAACP, represented Irvin at the second trial. An all-white jury convicted him, and he was sentenced to die. He narrowly escaped execution in 1954. Governor Leroy Collins, recently elected, commuted his sentence to life imprisonment with parole in 1955. Greenlee, also sentenced to life, was paroled in 1962 and then died in 2012. Irvin died in 1969, 1 year after he was paroled. Purportedly, he died of natural causes. Again, there's some question about that. King said it was very significant to have the exonerations in the same courtroom where an abomination of justice had occurred 72 years before. And just an amazing example of how things can eventually, if we're patient enough, balance out. The Groveland Four is an amazing example of miscarriage of justice, abomination of justice, as King said, and it kind of shows us the fragility of our justice system. We're always looking to improve our justice system, to get real justice, but cases like this are cautionary. We have to be sure that people are prosecuted for the right reasons and that justice is done.